The stars were cold and distant in the Kepler 442 system, where Firebase Sentinel floated alone in the darkness. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck and watched the distant sun cast its pale light across the metal hull of the station. He had been here for 8 months now, and the routine had become almost comfortable. 200 people called this place home, and most days nothing interesting happened at all. Lieutenant Claire Bennett walked up beside him with a data pad in her hands. She was his second in command, and probably the smartest tactical officer he had ever worked with. She showed him the daily reports, and everything looked normal. Sensor readings were clean, and the supply shipment was due in 3 weeks. The defensive grid was running at full capacity, and all the scientific experiments were on schedule. Down in the research section, Dr. Vincent Hayes was working on something that could change everything for humanity. His team had been studying quantum slipstream technology for 6 months, and the progress was remarkable. If they could crack the puzzle, then human ships could travel twice as fast as they did now. That would open up whole new regions of space for exploration and colonization. The crew was mostly young people who volunteered for frontier duty. Some wanted adventure, and others wanted to make a name for themselves in the service. A few were scientists who dreamed of discoveries that would echo through history. They all knew the risks of being this far from Earth, but Firebase Sentinel had good shields and weapons. Nobody really thought anything bad would happen out here. Lisa Wright sat at her sensor station on the command deck and ran through her checks for the 3rd time that day. She was thorough and careful, and that made her good at her job. The screens showed nothing but empty space and the usual background radiation. Sometimes she wondered if this job was too boring, but the pay was excellent, and she was saving money to buy a house back on Earth. In the mess hall, people ate their dinner and talked about normal things. Some played cards while others watched movies on their personal screens. Captain Greg Taylor sat with his crew from the transport ship Mercury's flight and told stories about his cargo runs through dangerous space. Everyone laughed at his jokes, even though they had heard most of them before. Firebase Sentinel was built like a small city in space. The central hub contained the command center and living quarters. 4 arms extended outward with labs and storage and the docking bay. Solar panels collected energy from the distant star, and backup reactors provided power when needed. The whole structure rotated slowly to create artificial gravity for the crew. Nobody knew that 30 Zythar warships were hiding in a debris field at the edge of the system. They had been there for 2 weeks, and their commanders were patient. The Zythar Consortium had decided that humanity was expanding too fast and needed to be taught a lesson. War Coordinator Veshatarek believed that destroying this isolated base would send the right message. The Zythar were not like humans. They had 4 arms and thick-scaled skin and eyes that could see into the infrared spectrum. Their civilization was old, and they had ruled this region of space for thousands of years. When humans started building colonies nearby, the Zythar leadership felt threatened. They watched as human technology improved rapidly, and their ships pushed deeper into contested territory. Veshatarek had argued in the consortium councils that a show of force was necessary. Some of the other leaders disagreed, but in the end his view won out. Firebase Sentinel was chosen because it was isolated and vulnerable. The plan was simple and brutal. Jump in fast and destroy everything before they could call for help. Leave no survivors and no evidence except the wreckage. On day 247 of the station's operation, Lisa Wright was finishing her shift when something caught her attention. The sensors picked up unusual gravitic distortions at the very edge of their range. She frowned and ran a diagnostic to make sure her equipment was working properly. The readings were real, but they did not make sense. It looked like something big was moving out there, but her screen showed empty space. She reached for the communication panel to call Commander Morrison when 30 massive shapes dropped out of stealth and appeared on every sensor screen at once. Her heart jumped into her throat, and her hands moved automatically to sound the alarm. The warning klaxons blared through every section of Firebase Sentinel, and people jumped up from what they were doing. Morrison was on the command deck in seconds, with Bennett right behind him. He took one look at the tactical display, and his face went pale. 30 warships were accelerating toward the station, and their weapons were charging. There was no time to negotiate and no time to prepare. He hit the emergency broadcast, and his voice echoed through the station, telling everyone to get to battle stations. The first missiles hit the shields 3 minutes later. The entire station shuddered and lights flickered as the defensive grid absorbed the impact. Bennett was already coordinating return fire from the station's limited weapons arrays. They had 6 railgun turrets and a dozen point defense lasers, but it was nothing compared to what was coming at them. Dr. Hayes ran to his lab and started transmitting everything to Earth through the quantum relay. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he uploaded research data and tactical information about the attack. He included clear images of the Zythar fleet and their approach vectors. If he was going to die, then at least Earth would know what happened and who did it. The shields collapsed after 7 minutes of sustained bombardment. Morrison made the hardest decision of his life and ordered an evacuation. He sealed off the damaged sections even though he could hear people screaming on the other side of the doors. There was no choice, because if he did not seal those sections, then everyone would die when the hull breached. People ran through the corridors toward the escape pods and the docking bay where Mercury's flight was waiting. Parents carried children and crew members helped the injured. The station kept shaking as more missiles slammed into the hull. Explosions tore through compartments and fires spread despite the automatic suppression systems. Bennett coordinated the evacuation with cold efficiency, even though tears ran down her face. She counted people as they climbed into escape pods and made sure the pods launched as soon as they were full. Captain Taylor fired up the engines on Mercury's flight and waited for as many people as he could fit aboard. Morrison stayed on the command deck and watched his crew escape. He kept the weapons firing to buy them time, and he rerouted power to keep the escape route clear. 97 people made it off the station before the Zythar fleet intensified their attack. The remaining 103 personnel, including Morrison, died when the reactors overloaded, and Firebase Sentinel exploded into a cloud of glowing debris. War Coordinator Veshetarek watched the destruction from his flagship and felt satisfied. The message had been sent, and now humanity would think twice before expanding further. He ordered his fleet to retreat immediately back to Zythar space. They jumped to faster than light speed and disappeared, leaving only wreckage behind. The survivors aboard Mercury's flight and the scattered escape pods were in shock. Bennett did a head count and realized that more than half their people were gone. She looked at the expanding debris field where Firebase Sentinel used to be, and wondered what Earth would do when they found out. Behind her, Lisa Wright's sister Nicole was on one of the rescue ships heading toward a human colony. She did not know yet that Lisa was dead. Captain Taylor set course for the nearest human outpost and pushed his engines as hard as they would go. In the cargo hold, people sat in silence or cried quietly. Some prayed and others just stared at nothing. They were alive, but their friends and colleagues were gone. Firebase Sentinel was gone, and everything felt unreal. 3 days later, the quantum relay transmission reached Earth, and everything changed. The quantum relay transmission burst into Earth's military command center like a bomb going off. Admiral Stephen Brooks was in a meeting when his aide rushed in with a datapad and a face as white as paper. The Admiral took one look at the transmission data and dismissed everyone else from the room. What he saw in the next 10 minutes made his blood run cold. Dr. Vincent Hayes had managed to send everything before he died. The images showed the Zythar fleet dropping out of stealth and opening fire without warning. The tactical data revealed how they had hidden in the debris field for weeks. The final transmission included audio of people screaming as the station came apart around them. Brooks watched it twice and then called President Helen Carter immediately. Within hours, every major leader on Earth knew what happened at Firebase Sentinel. President Carter convened an emergency session of the United Earth Council, and the chamber filled with angry voices. Representatives from every human colony demanded action, and the military leadership presented their evidence to the assembly. The images of the attack played on giant screens, and many people in the audience looked away. General Patricia Quinn of the Marine Corps stood at the podium and explained what the Zythar had done. This was not a military engagement between armed forces. Firebase Sentinel was a research station with families and civilians. The Zythar showed no mercy and gave no warning. They murdered 103 human beings in cold blood and then ran back to their territory like cowards. The public reaction was immediate and furious. News networks across Earth and all the colonies showed the footage continuously. People gathered in the streets demanding revenge. Parents held their children closer and wondered if any human in space was safe. The Zythar had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Admiral Brooks worked for 20 hours straight preparing a response plan. He gathered his best tactical minds, and they built something that shocked even the most aggressive military officers. The plan was called Operation Righteous Fury, and it was not about fighting a battle. It was about sending a message that would echo across the entire galaxy for the rest of time. Brooks presented the plan to President Carter in her private office. She listened without interrupting as he explained every detail. The plan called for the complete destruction of the Zithar homeworld using a weapon that humanity had built, but never deployed. The stellar cascade device would cause their sun to go supernova and wipe out everything in the system. Carter asked the question that had to be asked. How many Zithar civilians lived on the homeworld? Brooks answered honestly. Approximately 8 billion. They would all die along with anyone in orbit or on nearby stations. The entire Zithar species would be reduced to scattered refugees living in other systems. The president stood at her window and looked out at the city below. People were going about their normal lives, but everything had changed. She thought about the 103 souls lost at Firebase Sentinel. She thought about Dr. Hayes frantically transmitting data as the station died around him. She thought about Commander Morrison sealing doors on people he knew to save others. Then she made her decision. The United Earth Council debated for 6 hours. Counselor Richard Hayes stood up and held a picture of his brother Vincent. He spoke about how his brother believed in peaceful exploration and scientific discovery. He talked about the last message Vincent sent to their mother. Then he said that Vincent and all the others deserved justice, and he voted yes for Operation Righteous Fury. Counselor Amanda Foster argued against the plan. She said that destroying an entire world made humanity no better than the Zithar. 8 billion innocent people would die for the crimes of their military leadership. Future generations would judge humanity harshly for this decision. She begged the council to find another way. The debate raged on, but in the end the vote was clear. 47 counselors voted yes and 12 voted no. The authorization was granted and President Carter signed the order. She then prepared to address all of humanity in a speech that would be remembered forever. Carter's face appeared on every screen across human space. She spoke calmly, but her words carried weight like a hammer falling. She talked about Firebase Sentinel and the people who died there. She explained that humanity had tried peace and diplomacy. They had extended friendship to the stars, and the Zithar answered with murder. Now the Zithar would learn what it meant to attack humanity. Her final words became famous. Let it be known across the galaxy that humanity protects its own. Attack us and face extinction. We did not choose this path, but we will walk it to the end. This is not revenge alone. This is a message that will keep our children safe for generations to come. The military mobilization began immediately. Admiral Brooks assembled Task Force Vengeance from the best ships and crews in the fleet. 12 heavy battleships, including his flagship Retribution, would lead the attack. 36 destroyers would provide support. The stealth vessel Phantom would carry the stellar cascade device. Captain Nicole Wright received her orders while visiting her parents on Earth. They told her about Lisa, and she had to sit down because her legs would not hold her anymore. Lisa was dead at Firebase Sentinel. Her baby sister was gone. When they offered her command of the Phantom, she accepted without hesitation. If she was going to lose her sister, then the Zithar would pay the ultimate price. The Phantom's crew was selected from volunteers only. Every single person had lost someone at Firebase Sentinel. Lieutenant Paul Chen's husband Derek had been a researcher on the station. Chief Pilot Kevin Martinez lost his best friend. Sensor Technician Mary Rogers lost her cousin. They all knew this mission might be one way, but they did not care. The stellar cascade device was brought out of deep storage, where it had sat for 15 years. Scientists had developed it as a deterrent weapon, but never imagined actually using it. The device would trigger a chain reaction in a star's core that could not be stopped. Once deployed, the star would go supernova within hours. Lieutenant Chen studied the device day and night. He understood the physics better than anyone, and he would be responsible for calibrating it to the Zithar sun. One mistake and the device might fail. He could not let that happen. He owed Derek that much. Brooks addressed the assembled fleet before departure. Thousands of personnel stood at attention on their ships and listened through the communication system. He told them this mission would change everything. They were about to do something that had never been done before. They would destroy an entire civilization to protect humanity. He acknowledged the weight of what they carried. 8 billion lives would end because of what they were about to do. Some of those lives were innocent. Children would die. Families would be torn apart, but he reminded them of Firebase Sentinel. He reminded them of the 103 people who died begging for mercy that never came. The survivors from Firebase Sentinel arrived at Earth just before the fleet departed. Lieutenant Bennett requested a meeting with Admiral Brooks, and he granted it immediately. She walked into his office still wearing her torn uniform. She had refused to change it because she said it reminded her of what happened. Bennett gave Brooks a message from the survivors. Make them understand what they have done. Make sure the Zyther know exactly why their world is burning. Do not let them die thinking this was random or unjust. They need to know this is the direct result of Firebase Sentinel. Brooks promised her he would deliver that message personally. Then he asked if she wanted to join the task force. Bennett shook her head. She was going back to the frontier to help build Firebase Sentinel, too. Someone needed to keep watch and honor the memory of Commander Morrison and all the others. Task Force Vengeance departed Earth on a cold morning with crowds watching from observation platforms. The ships formed up in perfect formation and engaged their slipstream drives. In an instant, they vanished into faster-than-light travel. The journey to the Zithar homeworld would take 3 weeks. Back on Zith Prime, War Coordinator Veshtarek celebrated his successful mission. The consortium leadership congratulated him on his decisive action against the human threat. They hosted ceremonies and awarded him honors. None of them had any idea what was coming toward them through the darkness of space. The hammer was falling and nothing could stop it now. Task Force Vengeance traveled through slipstream space for 3 weeks in complete silence. No transmissions went out and no signals came in. The fleet moved like ghosts through the darkness between stars. Admiral Brooks sat in his quarters every night and read through the casualty list from Firebase Sentinel. He memorized every name and every face because he wanted to remember why they were doing this. Captain Raymond Cole was Brooks's executive officer, and he watched the Admiral carefully. He saw the toll this mission was taking, but he knew better than to suggest the Admiral was anything less than completely committed. They all carried the weight of what was coming. 8 billion lives would end because of their actions. That number was too big to really understand, but they tried anyway. On the Phantom, Captain Nicole Wright ran daily briefings with her crew. The stealth ship had to penetrate deep into the Zithar system without being detected. They would plant the stellar cascade device near the sun, and then escape before the reaction became irreversible. Any mistake meant death for the entire crew and failure of the mission. Lieutenant Paul Chen worked on the device constantly. He ran simulations and checked calculations until his eyes burned. The technology was solid, but it had never been tested at this scale. He dreamed about Derek every night, and sometimes he woke up crying. Other times he woke up angry. The anger was easier to deal with, so he focused on that. The fleet emerged from slipstream at the very edge of the Zith system. They were far beyond the range of normal sensors, and Brooks wanted to keep it that way. He ordered reconnaissance drones launched to map the system defenses. The data came back within hours, and it was not encouraging. Zith Prime orbited a yellow sun similar to Earth's. 6 other planets filled out the system. 3 massive defense stations guarded the homeworld along with a fleet of over 100 warships. Additional military bases sat on moons throughout the system. The Zythar had built their home into a fortress. Brooks gathered his tactical staff and they studied the data for hours. The plan they developed was risky, but it was the only option. The main fleet would attack the outer system and draw the Zythar forces away from the homeworld. While the enemy was distracted, the Phantom would slip through their lines and reach the sun. The numbers were bad. Task Force Vengeance would be outnumbered 5-1. Even with better human technology, people would die. Ships would burn. But the mission required a distraction, and Brooks would provide it. He called it a feint, but everyone knew it was really a sacrifice. Captain Wright volunteered to go in first while the Zythar were still unaware. This would give her the maximum time window to complete her mission before the enemy realized what was happening. Brooks did not want to agree, but he knew she was right. The Phantom separated from the fleet and began its silent approach to the inner system. The stealth ship's hull absorbed sensor scans, while its quiet engines produced almost no heat signature. Wright and her crew passed within a few thousand kilometers of Zithar patrol ships. Every time an enemy vessel came close, everyone on the Phantom held their breath. The tension was unbearable, but their stealth held. They could see Zith Prime on their view screens now. It was a beautiful world with blue oceans and green continents. Cities sparkled on the night side where billions of Zythar lived normal lives. They had no idea their world had been marked for destruction. They did not know about Firebase Sentinel. They were innocent. Lieutenant Chen came to the bridge and stood next to Wright. He asked quietly if she ever doubted the mission. Wright stared at the planet for a long moment. "Every minute," she admitted. "But then I remember Lisa, I remember all of them. The Zythar leadership made this choice when they destroyed Firebase Sentinel. We are just delivering the consequences." The Phantom reached its deployment position just outside the sun's corona. The heat was intense, even with shields at maximum. Chen and his team began arming the Stellar Cascade device. The device had to be calibrated precisely to the star's specific characteristics. One wrong calculation and it would fail to trigger the chain reaction. The work took hours. Chen's hands shook as he entered the final sequences. He thought about Derek working in his lab on Firebase Sentinel. Derek never knew what hit him. The Zythar gave him no chance to escape. Now Chen was about to kill billions of Zythar, and he felt nothing but cold determination. The sensors detected Task Force Vengeance arriving at the outer system exactly on schedule. Admiral Brooks began his attack with devastating precision. Human railguns fired projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. 2 Zythar defense platforms exploded before they could even raise their shields. The message was clear. Humanity had arrived and they were not here to talk. The Zythar home fleet scrambled to respond. War Coordinator Veshtarek was on the surface of Zith Prime when the alert came through. He could not believe humans would dare attack the homeworld itself. He ordered every ship to launch and destroy the human fleet. Over 100 Zythar warships rushed toward Brooks' position. On the Phantom, Chen reported the device was ready. Wright gave the order and the Stellar Cascade device launched toward the sun. The small object fell into the photosphere and disappeared. Deep inside the stellar core, quantum reactions began to cascade out of control. The star's natural fusion process started to accelerate beyond sustainable levels. Wright ordered maximum stealth and the Phantom turned to leave. They had 4 hours before the reaction became irreversible. 4 hours to get out of the system. 4 hours before the sun exploded. But then a Zythar scout ship's random sensor sweep caught a tiny gravitational anomaly. The scout moved to investigate. The Phantom's stealth failed. The scout ship got a clear reading and immediately broadcast an alert. Wright cursed and ordered the scout destroyed, but it was too late. Dozens of Zythar ships broke away from the main battle and turned toward the Phantom's position. They knew something was wrong and they were coming fast. Wright pushed the engines beyond their rated limits. The Phantom was built for stealth, not speed. The pursuing Zythar ships were faster, and they were closing the distance. Plasma weapons began hitting the Phantom's shields. Chen reported shield strength dropping rapidly. They were not going to make it out. Admiral Brooks saw what was happening on his tactical display. He made his decision instantly. He ordered the entire fleet to turn and burn toward the Phantom's position at maximum speed. The feint was over. Now it was a race to save Wright and her crew before the Zythar killed them. The Phantom dodged through an asteroid field with Zythar ships right behind. Chief Pilot Kevin Martinez performed miracles at the helm. He threaded the ship through gaps that seemed impossible. Asteroids exploded around them as Zythar weapons fire missed by meters. A Zythar destroyer got too close and Chen diverted power for one weapon shot. The Phantom's railgun fired and the destroyer's bridge vanished in an explosion. But the power drain let 3 plasma bolts through the shields. The aft section took damage and 6 crew members died instantly. Chen was thrown against a bulkhead and his arm broke, but he crawled back to his station. Task Force Vengeance entered weapons range and opened fire. Even from millions of kilometers away, human railguns were deadly accurate. Relativistic projectiles crossed the distance in seconds and smashed into pursuing Zythar ships. Hulls crumpled and reactors exploded. The Zythar suddenly found themselves caught between 2 fires. Brooks committed everything to a full assault. He knew this was the moment where the mission would succeed or fail. The human fleet charged directly into the much larger Zythar force. Battleships traded fire at close range. Destroyers slashed at enemy cruisers. Space filled with debris and the flash of dying ships. The destroyer Valiant saw a Zythar battlecruiser lining up for a shot that would destroy the Phantom. Captain Sarah Mitchell made her choice without hesitation. She rammed her ship into the enemy at full speed. Both vessels exploded in a ball of plasma and radiation. The Phantom survived. Wright brought her damaged ship into the protective formation of the task force. She reported to Brooks that the device was active and counting down. They had 90 minutes before the star went critical. 90 minutes to get far enough away or they would all die in the explosion. Brooks ordered a fighting withdrawal. The fleet began pulling back toward the edge of the system, but the Zythar pursued relentlessly. Veshtarak finally understood something terrible had happened. He ordered his ships to destroy the humans at any cost. He still did not know his world was already dead. The timer counted down as both fleets raced away from the sun. 60 minutes, 45 minutes, 30 minutes. Human ships were burning and dying, but they kept moving. The Zithar were taking even heavier losses, but they would not stop. Behind them all, deep in the sun's core, the reaction built toward its inevitable conclusion. The space battle raged as both fleets desperately tried to reach safe distance from the dying star. Human ships fired continuously while pulling back, and the Zithar pressed their attack with fury, born of growing fear. Captain Raymond Cole watched the tactical display and calculated their chances. They were not good, but they were not impossible either. The destroyer Courage took a direct hit to its reactor and exploded in a flash of light that briefly outshone the distant stars. 300 crew members died in an instant. Brooks felt each loss like a knife in his chest, but he could not stop now. He ordered the fleet to maintain formation and keep moving. Every second counted and every kilometer mattered. On Zith Prime, scientists detected the anomalous readings coming from their sun. At first they thought it was a sensor malfunction, but multiple instruments confirmed the data. The star's core temperature was rising at an impossible rate. Fusion reactions were cascading out of control. One scientist looked at the readings and felt ice fill his veins. He knew exactly what this meant. Emergency broadcasts went out across the planet within minutes. Every screen showed the same message: evacuate immediately. The sun was going to explode. People looked up at the sky in disbelief. Their sun had shone steadily for billions of years. How could it suddenly be dying? Panic spread through the cities like wildfire. Millions of Zithar rushed to spaceports and personal ships. Parents grabbed their children and ran. The wealthy used their private vessels to flee. The poor crowded into public transports that could never hold everyone. Ships launched from every landing pad, but there were 8 billion people on Zith Prime and only hours left. Most would never escape. War Coordinator Veshtarak stood on the bridge of his flagship and finally understood. The humans had not come to fight a simple battle. They had come to end his entire species. The weight of his mistake at Firebase Sentinel crashed down on him like a collapsing building. He had killed 103 humans, and now billions of his own people would pay the price. He tried to order his fleet to break off and return to the homeworld, but it was too late for that. His ships were committed to the battle, and they were too far away to make any difference. Even if every Zithar warship turned around right now, they could not evacuate even a fraction of the population before the star exploded. Admiral Brooks checked the countdown. 15 minutes. The fleet was still not far enough away. He looked at the damage reports and made a decision that tore at his soul. He ordered the most damaged ships to fall behind and provide covering fire. Those crews would not make it to safe distance, but they could buy time for the rest of the fleet. The battleship Justice had taken severe damage to its engines and could barely maintain speed. Captain Daniel Harper received his orders and understood immediately. He gathered his remaining crew and told them the truth. They were going to die here, but they would die protecting their brothers and sisters in the other ships. Not one person objected. The Justice and 4 other damaged vessels turned to face the pursuing Zithar fleet. They fired everything they had left. Railguns blazed and missiles streaked through space. The Zithar returned fire, and the human ships began to come apart. But they held their position and bought precious minutes for task force vengeance to gain distance. On Zith Prime, the sky began to change color. The sun grew brighter and took on a reddish tinge. People stopped running and just stared upward. Some held their loved ones close. Others fell to their knees and prayed to gods who could not save them. Parents covered their children's eyes and whispered that everything would be okay, even though they knew it was a lie. The countdown reached 0. Deep in the star's core, the cascading reaction hit critical mass. The temperature spiked to levels that matter could not withstand. The core collapsed for a brief instant and then exploded outward with unimaginable force. The star became a supernova. The initial radiation wave moved at light speed. It hit Zith Prime 8 minutes after the explosion began. The electromagnetic pulse knocked out every electronic system on the planet instantly. Then the X-rays and gamma radiation arrived. Every living thing on the day side of the planet died in seconds. Flesh burned and vaporized. Buildings melted. The oceans began to boil. The night side had a few more seconds of life. People there saw the sun suddenly grow impossibly bright. Then the thermal wave arrived and the atmosphere itself began to burn. The lucky ones died without knowing what happened. The unlucky ones had time to scream. The actual stellar material moving at 30% of light speed reached the planet minutes later. The expanding shell of superheated plasma hit like the fist of an angry god. Sith Prime's atmosphere was stripped away completely. The oceans flashed to steam and vanished. The planetary crust cracked and began to melt. Within an hour, the planet was breaking apart into glowing fragments. The Zythar fleet closer to the sun had no chance at all. War Coordinator Veshtarik saw the radiation wave coming on his sensors. He had 3 seconds to understand that he had doomed his entire civilization. Then his ship and everything in it vaporized. Over 100 Zythar warships died in the expanding wave of destruction. Task Force Vengeance felt the shock wave when it reached them. Ships rocked violently and more damage reports flooded in. The destroyer Phoenix lost main power and went dark. The battleship Determination took structural damage to its hull. But they were far enough away to survive. Brooks had calculated correctly. As the radiation levels dropped to survivable levels, Brooks ordered the fleet to stop and conduct rescue operations. Ships that could still maneuver moved to assist the damaged vessels. The Phoenix was taken under tow. Medical teams worked frantically to save the injured. The final count showed that 39 ships remained operational out of 48 that entered the system. Over 6,000 human personnel had died in the battle. Their names would be added to the memorial alongside the Firebase Sentinel casualties. Brooks stood on the bridge of the Retribution and felt the weight of every loss. But the mission was complete. Sith Prime was gone. The fleet held position at the edge of the expanding debris field. Brooks wanted the galaxy to see what humanity had done. He wanted every species out there to understand the price of attacking human civilians. He ordered a message broadcast on all frequencies in every known language. The message was simple and cold. This is the consequence of attacking humanity. Firebase Sentinel was a research station with families and scientists. The Zythar showed no mercy. We have answered in kind. Let all who would harm our people know this fate awaits them. Humanity protects its own. Attack us and face extinction. The broadcast repeated continuously as the fleet sat in the ruins of the Sith system. Sensors detected scattered Zythar ships fleeing in all directions. A few transport vessels had escaped Sith Prime before the explosion. Perhaps a few million Zythar survived somewhere in the galaxy. Their homeworld and the majority of their species were gone forever. Captain Nicole Wright sat in her quarters on the damaged Phantom and thought about Lisa. Her sister had died at Firebase Sentinel, never knowing that her death would lead to this. Wright wondered if Lisa would approve of what they had done. She decided it did not matter. The Zythar had made their choice and humanity had responded. Lieutenant Paul Chen worked on repairs to the Phantom with his broken arm in a makeshift sling. He thought about Derek and allowed himself to feel satisfied. It was not happiness exactly. Derek was still dead and nothing would bring him back. But the people who killed him had paid the ultimate price. That had to be enough. Admiral Brooks recorded his final log entry for the mission. He described the battle and the destruction of Sith Prime in clinical detail. He listed every ship lost and every casualty by name. Then he wrote his personal thoughts. We did something terrible here today. We destroyed a world and killed billions. History will judge us, but I would make the same choice again to protect humanity. We are not monsters. We are guardians, and we will do whatever is necessary to keep our people safe. Task Force Vengeance prepared to return home. The journey would take 6 weeks and give everyone time to process what they had done. Some would feel guilt. Others would feel pride. Most would feel both and struggle to reconcile the contradiction. They had saved countless future human lives by making an example so terrible that no one would dare repeat the Zythar's mistake. The fleet jumped to slipstream and left the Sith system behind. Where a thriving civilization had existed for thousands of years, now there was only expanding debris and radiation. The star continued to burn as a supernova, a monument to the price of attacking humanity. The light from that explosion would travel across the galaxy for millions of years. Everyone who saw it would know what happened here and why. Task Force Vengeance returned to Earth 6 weeks after destroying Sith Prime. The fleet was battered and scarred, but they had completed their mission. Crowds gathered at the orbital stations to watch the ships arrive. Some people cheered and waved flags. Others stood in silence and thought about the terrible cost of what had been done. Admiral Brooks and his senior staff provided detailed reports to the United Earth Council. Military analysts studied the tactical data from the battle. The recordings of Zith Prime's final moments were classified at the highest levels. The Council decided that footage was too disturbing for public release. Some things were better left unseen. President Helen Carter addressed the human worlds once more. She declared Firebase Sentinel avenged and honored everyone who died in both attacks. A memorial was built on Earth with every name carved into black stone. The monument stood 100 meters tall, and people came from across human space to see it and remember. Captain Nicole Wright was promoted to admiral and offered command of the new 6th Fleet. She accepted the position and said her sister Lisa would have wanted her to continue protecting humanity's frontier. Lieutenant Paul Chen received the Star of Valor for his work deploying the Stellar Cascade device. He kept the medal in a drawer and never looked at it. Lieutenant Claire Bennett returned to the coordinates where Firebase Sentinel once stood. A new station was being built there and she was given command. She named the central habitat Morrison Hall after Commander Jake Morrison. Every day she walked past his memorial plaque and remembered the man who saved her life by sealing those doors. The destruction of Zith Prime sent shockwaves through the entire galaxy. The Zithar consortium collapsed within weeks. The 3 client species that had followed Zithar leadership immediately sent ambassadors to Earth, begging for peace. They swore they had nothing to do with the Firebase Sentinel attack, and humanity chose to believe them. Other alien civilizations watched and learned. Species that had viewed human expansion with hostility suddenly became very interested in diplomacy. Trade delegations arrived at Earth in unprecedented numbers. Non-aggression pacts were signed. Technology exchanges were negotiated. The message was clear and everyone understood it. Humanity would extend friendship and cooperation to peaceful species. But any civilization that harmed human civilians would face total destruction. The ruins of Zith Prime served as proof that this was not an empty threat. The supernova burned in space where their homeworld once was, and everyone could see it. Not everyone celebrated what humanity had done. Protest movements emerged on Earth in several colonies. People argued that destroying an entire world was genocide. 8 billion innocent Zithar civilians died for the crimes of their government. Future generations would remember this as humanity's greatest shame. Counselor Amanda Foster became the voice of this movement. She gave speeches arguing that humanity had compromised its moral standing. The Zithar military leadership deserved punishment, but not the children and families who knew nothing about Firebase Sentinel. She said humanity could have found another way. President Carter addressed these concerns in a press conference. She did not apologize, but she acknowledged the weight of the decision. "We did not choose this path lightly," she said. "When faced with an enemy that murdered our civilians without mercy, we had to respond with overwhelming force. Not just for revenge, but to ensure it never happens again. If that makes us monsters in some eyes, then we accept that judgment. But our people are alive and safe because of what we did." The debate continued for years. Philosophy professors wrote papers about the ethics of the decision. Religious leaders struggled with the moral implications. History books would argue both sides forever. But one fact remained undeniable. After Zith Prime, not a single human outpost suffered another unprovoked attack. The Terran frontier, which had been dangerous and uncertain, became secure almost overnight. Colony ships traveled to distant systems without fear. Research stations operated in peace. Trade routes expanded into regions that were previously too risky. The cost had been terrible, but the result was effective. Admiral Brooks retired from active service 3 years after Operation Righteous Fury. He gave a final speech to graduating cadets at the military academy. "I hope none of you ever face the choices I faced," he told them. "But if you do, then remember this. Our first duty is to protect human lives. Every decision must be measured against that duty." The Zithar forced our hand, and we answered. Humanity endures because we were willing to do what was necessary. The Stellar Cascade device technology was not dismantled despite protests. 3 more devices were built and assigned to the fleet's most secret ships. The weapons existed as the ultimate deterrent. Everyone knew humanity still possessed the ability to destroy worlds. That knowledge kept potential enemies cautious. 10 years after Firebase Sentinel, a delegation of Zithar survivors requested permission to meet with human leadership. The remnant of their species now numbered perhaps 5 million scattered across multiple worlds. They had no homeworld and no central government. They were refugees dependent on the charity of other species. Admiral Nicole Wright agreed to meet with them as Chief of Naval Operations. The meeting was tense and difficult. The Zythar delegates were young and had not been involved in the original attack. They spoke carefully and showed proper respect. They asked if humanity could ever forgive their species for what happened. Wright considered the question for a long time before answering. "Forgiveness is possible," she said, "but forgetting is not. What happened at Firebase Sentinel and what happened at Zith Prime will echo through history forever. Both serve as reminders, to your people about the cost of aggression, to mine about how far we will go to protect our own. Perhaps both our species can learn from these memories and build something better." A peace treaty was signed. Humanity provided humanitarian aid to Zythar refugee settlements. Some humans protested this decision, but most understood it. The Zythar who survived were not the ones who attacked Firebase Sentinel. They were children and civilians who had no say in their government's choices. They deserved a chance to rebuild their lives. The memorial at Firebase Sentinel 2 became a pilgrimage site. Every year on the anniversary, ceremonies were held. Veterans of Task Force Vengeance attended, and their numbers slowly decreased as time passed. Families of the fallen came to remember their loved ones. Children learned the story of the 103 souls whose deaths changed human history. In the expanded human territories, new colonies flourished under the protection of a stronger defense force. The frontier pushed ever outward. Humanity's message to the galaxy had been received and understood. They were explorers and scientists and dreamers. They offered friendship to all who approached in peace. But they were also warriors when necessary. Across the galaxy on 1,000 different worlds the story was told. Species taught their young about what happened when the Zythar attacked a human base. They explained how Earth destroyed an entire world in response. The lesson was clear, and no one wanted to test whether humanity would do it again. The stars belonged to many species, but humanity had carved out its place among them. Not through conquest, but through the demonstration of absolute resolve. They had shown they would wage total war to protect their people. The ashes of Zith Prime drifted through space as eternal proof of this truth. Admiral Wright stood on the bridge of her flagship and looked out at the stars. She thought about Lisa and all the others who died at Firebase Sentinel. She thought about the billions who died at Zith Prime. The weight of those deaths never left her, but she had learned to carry it. This was the price of keeping humanity safe. In quiet moments, human crews on patrol looked at their star charts and saw the supernova remnant where Zith Prime used to be. They remembered what happened there and why. They understood that peace was maintained through strength and the willingness to use it. They stood ready to defend humanity's frontier against any threat. The legacy of Firebase Sentinel and Zith Prime became the foundation of human foreign policy for generations. Not aggressive, but absolutely decisive. Not cruel, but without mercy for those who threatened human lives. The galaxy learned to respect humanity not because they sought dominance, but because they had proven they would accept no alternative. Children across human space grew up hearing the story. They learned about Commander Morrison and Dr. Hayes. They learned about the 103 people who died in the initial attack. They learned about the 6,000 who died bringing vengeance. And they learned the most important lesson of all. Humanity protects its own. Attack us and face extinction. This was not a threat. It was a promise written in the ruins of a dead world. The stars shone on and humanity moved among them with confidence born of terrible resolve. They came to space seeking peace, but they would stay there on their own terms. This was the new order, and it was written in fire across the galaxy for all to see and remember forever.